Welcome all to another group session. This is group session number 4 on strategic management. This group session focuses on SWOT analysis and decision making. Firstly, let's consider what SWOT analysis is. A SWOT analysis is a strategy tool used to understand what your organization is good at and assesses the organization's lacking areas to allow for future planning for success. Before I expand on this statement, SWOT itself is an abbreviation that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'll talk more about this abbreviation in the next slide. Still, what is a SWOT analysis strategy tool? In this definition, which I've put forward in this slide, you will see that the keywords are understanding what your organization is good at doing now, right over here. And then the other keyword is to assess the organization's lacking. In this essence, you will know that a SWOT analysis tool would help you to understand the things that the organization or the team is already good at doing and can be, focused on to ensure that there are key high impact outputs when a project is implemented, and then also look at the gaps that the organization has, so much so that we can be able to create opportunities to fill those gaps to ensure that we still achieve what we want in the beginning. Let's dive deeper into the abbreviation SWOT. From the previous slide, you remember I said that the abbreviation for SWOT is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Firstly, we should consider that these 4 letters or these 4 words are categorized into 2, which are factors which are in line with either what the organization is good at or the gaps that the organization has. So some of the factors are internal, some of them are external factors to the organization. Let's take a look at the internal factors. What are strengths? So strengths are factors that are meant to support an opportunity or overcome a threat to give you an advantage. When we look at, for example, a practical example of an organization, you probably assess what your strengths are, what the organization is good at already, in order to give the required outputs. In an example of an animal welfare organization, we can take an example that maybe the team already has got background knowledge in animal welfare and knows how to train other people in animal welfare issues as an area which is a strength, which is an internal factor because it exists within the team. While when we go to weaknesses, these are factors of your business or a project or your team that mean you are unable to take advantage of an opportunity or you are vulnerable to a threat. This just necessarily means that when you assess yourself in or assess the project, the lackings that you have as a team, or the lackings that the project has, which are gaps, which limits you to actually acquire the key outputs that you want to acquire. These are what we call weaknesses, and these are internal factors or internal weaknesses which you can have control over. Now, jumping on to opportunities, these are external factors. So opportunities are external factors over which you have no control but still are helpful. For example, you are implementing an animal welfare project. Opportunities can be that there are tools and trainings externally or resources externally that are available that your organization can use to actually train the target population that you want in animal welfare issues. So this can be an example of an opportunity that is externally from your organization or from your project that you can be able to utilize to still achieve the goal that you want to achieve at the end. While on the other side, in terms of threats, these are external factors over which you have no control and are harmful or detrimental towards the implementation of the project which you want to implement. Let's take for the same example of an animal welfare project where you're still training other people on animal welfare issues. A threat can be cultural barriers or cultural limitations which your target group already has in line with animal welfare issues. So that is a threat because it tends to limit the efforts which you can make towards the mindset change of that target population. Now, let's take a look at how you actually compile your SWOT analysis. Your SWOT analysis is compiled by drafting a 4-quadrant framework, like the example which you see in this slide, where there are 4 quadrants named after strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The idea behind is to actually give you an overview of what the organization or the team's strengths are, what are their weaknesses, opportunities, and what their threats are. And immediately, using this quadrant, you can be able to know what key strengths and opportunities you have that you can utilize to your advantage, and you can, continue focusing on them because these are the things that you can take advantage of or you're already good at. But then the also other important thing is looking at keenly on the weaknesses and the threats that you have and designing ways in which you can be able to either turn these weaknesses into strength by either uh, designing trainings or having access to resources that can turn these weaknesses into actual strength. For example, if one of the weaknesses is for a project is lack of technical knowledge on, let's take for example, technical knowledge on disease treatments for animals, you can put um, you know a way in which you can be able to resolve this weakness through staff training in animal welfare and the animal health care and the disease treatment. so much so that you can reverse that weakness and turn it into a strength. So that's kind of like the idea. And next, you also look at the threats that you have. What are the key external factors that are harmful to your project? Earlier on, we talked about a threat being culturally the target population has already an inbuilt culture where animal welfare issues are not important. So while you know that that is your threat, how can you best turn that into a weakness? Can you be able to create mindset change, training opportunities to the target population so much so that this threat can be eliminated? What shield can you give to ensure that you still achieve your desired output or outcome for the project? I believe you get the idea. Let's move on to the next slide. Now that we have seen how best we can frame our SWOT analysis tool into the 4-quadrant format, let's take a look at a practical example of a SWOT analysis assessment tool. I've borrowed this SPCA SWOT analysis tool that was used on an app which they were using to actually provide spay and neuter services. Due to time, I'll only dwell on a few examples within the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats column. Firstly, let's take a look at the strength. They identified education and awareness about cruelty of animals was the strength of the app. So the app had a lot of information that people can access on the awareness about cruelty of animals. So it informed people better. However, when they assessed the app, they noticed that there is poor adoption experience. Not a lot of people were able to adopt animals. Why was that so? It could be because the app was not user friendly. The information for adoption was not well structured enough, so much so that people were having difficulties to actually do that. Or it might have been external factors. And then the long process of making a donations. Again, it could be how the app was laid out, it wasn't user friendly, etc. So the process for one to make a donation was just complex, and it would maybe result into people not making donations at all. So these were the most big two key weakness areas, which can be analyzed and turned into strength or turned into opportunities. Let's go to opportunities. You would see that one of the key opportunities there was to add fun elements to increase animal adoption. There's still room for them to tweak the app so much so that there can be fun elements towards it or interesting elements, or the app can be user friendly so much so that people can easily um, you know make an adoption of an animal or can be captured to make that adoption quite easily. And then the other one being increased donations by simplifying the donation process. All this has to do with how they can be able to restructure the layout of the app so much so that it is simple. Maybe sliding to the left, sliding to the right, or sliding up and down. Simple tasks which are user friendly. And lastly, on threats, economic downturn affecting donations. Due to worsening economic situations, people just don't have enough money to actually donate to the organization using the app. So this is quite frankly an external threat that is detrimental to your initiatives. So the basis of this, actually, to make in conclusion, is to actually look into the weaknesses and looking into the threats and how best you can turn these into opportunities and key strength. Now let's refocus our talk or discussion towards decision making. Before we go into the details of how to make good decisions and the step-by-step processes on making good decisions, I would like to highlight that decision making is a process and not a one-time single event. Most people think decision is just a person deciding what to do. It should be looked at as a process. Firstly, gathering in the right information that you can use to make that decision, and also choosing multiple options or strategies which you can still achieve what you want to achieve, and choosing or deciding on what is the most effective way possible. So that's the step-by-step process. So it is a process and not a single event. In this outline, I've given about 8 steps in which you can be able to make a good decision. Firstly, when making a decision, you have to frame your decision. You have to ensure the problem is carefully analyzed, clearly defined, and everyone involved in the outcome agrees on what needs to be solved. In this statement, you would see that there are about 3 keywords: assessment, right here, and clearly defined, right here, and involvement of all stakeholders, right here. When making a decision, it's always critical to make an assessment. Remember, in the previous slide, I talked about gathering enough information that you can make an assessment of what is good and what is bad, or what can best be used to clearly make a good outcome, or for you to use to make a good outcome or to make a good decision. So you gather relevant information, which I'm also going to talk about in the next few slides. And then you also have to clearly define what that decision is. Communication is always key. So if you have effective communication and everyone knows what the decision is, people are able to utilize that decision to actually make processes that are in line with that decision which you have made. And lastly, get everyone involved in the decision-making process. Whenever you're making a decision, you have to ensure that you are able to involve all the key stakeholders who are going to either get affected with that decision, or they will be interested in the outcomes of that decision. Because if you don't, interpretation of the key outcomes might be different, or the need of the key outcomes after that decision might be different. Hence, some other stakeholders might not find your decision as useful because it doesn't resonate with the needs that they have. So it is always best to involve all your stakeholders and ensure that they are in agreement with the actual decision that they make. It should also be clear here that not all stakeholders will be in agreement, but then sometimes they are still aware of what has transpired and what has led towards a person making that decision. So in the long run, they do understand the process that is there. So buy-in is always easier when you involve all stakeholders. Secondly, you have to structure your team. Remember, I think we talked about involving everyone that is critical and that is important towards the decision-making process, and also that is going to be affected by the key outcome. So secondly, I think structuring your team also involves kind of like a bit about that. you need to assemble the right people to navigate the decision-making process. Different people have got different expertise. So whenever you're assembling your team that is going to be involved in the decision-making process, ensure that you look into what these people are good at and what knowledge areas they have to ensure that they make meaningful contributions towards the decision that you want to make. And the third one being considering the time frame. Here we are talking about urgency versus importance. Whenever you want to make a decision, each and every decision is bound to time. If an issue that has arisen and needs you to make a decision on is very urgent, the process in which you can take to ensure that you make that decision might be shorter and might maybe skip some other elements of decision making while still maintaining um, you know, the most important elements to ensure that you make an informed decision. For example, if you have an emergency uh, that only needs 30 minutes for you to address the situation, or things might get worse, for you to involve all the stakeholders might take you longer to to make consultations. So sometimes you just need to skip some of those key stakeholders and trust that you make a very good decision based on the limited information and data that you have, and you make that decision because you don't have enough time. And the other thing is about importance. You know, very strategic, important decisions need time for you to make them. For example, decisions that would affect long-term strategy of an organization, of a company, you need to take your time to make consultation with all stakeholders, gather enough data that would ensure that the decision that you're making will be the right decision, because it will affect the long-term implementation of a certain project, for example. So whenever you're considering your decision-making process, also consider the urgency and the importance of that in relation to your time frame. Another important thing that you have to consider when you have made a decision is to actually establish your approach. Once you make that decision, I think people need to be clear on what their roles are. So you need to establish ground rules and assign roles to team members so they know what to do at the once you have make that informed decision. So the decision that you make need at least to follow a certain approach where people are much more clearly on what they need to do. This will enable people to ensure that they work towards achieving the goal based upon the decision which you have made, because everybody else is able to execute what they need to execute and play the important role that they are assigned, and there is no chaos where people are doing the things that they are not supposed to do. So this is very, very important. Also, culture is also an important element when it comes to establishing your approach. Culture within an organization or within a team is very valuable. People need to be aligned uh, towards achieving the same goals and need to act in the same mannerism of values and culture which the project team and the organization need to have in order for them to work together to achieve the goal that they need to achieve. Therefore, it is always important to establish your approach and ensure that everybody else is on the same page, so much so that they can work towards achieving what you are setting out to achieve. Another thing that you have to consider is encouraging discussion and debate. It is always great to have constructive criticism and look into the decisions that you're making, or the arguments that you're making with different angles, to ensure that the final decision which you make has taken into account all factors, and also have taken into account all the critical areas which would allow you to make a good decision. So it's always best to designate some roles that are focused on poking holes in an argument or fostering debate. Because, as human beings, we are biased to some extent. And because of that, sometimes we tend to think that we are making good decisions, but then we may end up not making good decisions. So it's always best to view your decisions in different angles, take matters in different perspectives, so much so that you ensure that you have made a good decision. So for you to achieve that, you need to have other key players that allow to debate and argue the decision which you have made, to ensure that you reinforce positive, constructive criticism that will inform you to make a good decision at the end of the day. Remember, we talked about structuring your team and ensuring that you are able to consult with various key stakeholders that are there in the decision-making process. Knowing your limit is also important. To how many people can be consulted? What are the important groups that can be consulted, that can provide meaningful contributions towards the decision-making process? So ensuring the size of the group is appropriate to the problem and allows for an efficient workflow is always vital. As they always say, too much is poisonous. So if you involve a lot of people in the decision-making process itself, sometimes it becomes problematic, because various people have got various opinions, and at the end of the day, if you navigate throughout all these key suggestions and key information that you get from these various people from all walks of life, you tend to be to arrive at a confusion where you are unable to make an informed decision. So this is where you evaluate your team and ensure that you put the right people that can be able to inform you better in the decision-making process, while bringing a balance towards biasness. Therefore, your team is supposed to be sizable, that it can enable you to make a good decision fast, and your workflow is much more efficient. Another factor to think through when making a decision is ensuring the pieces are in place for implementation. What do we mean? Firstly, you have to ensure that there are shared goals that were presented upfront, and you have assessed them, and you're choosing the right goals to include in the final stage. Also, look at alternative options that have been given rigorous thought and fair consideration. For example, remember, I keep on emphasizing that there are different routes which you can use to arrive at the same outcome. What matters most is the most efficient and effective route possible. So you always have to look at all the various options that are there to ensure that you are making the best decision with the utmost efficiency and effectiveness after weighing in on all these alternatives. So later on, I think you also look at sound methods for exploring the consequences of the decisions which you have made. This just reinforces that you are able to use the right tools and the right information that will enable you to make better decisions. Lastly, when making a decision, you have to achieve closure and alignment. What do we mean? Achieving closure in the decision-making process requires arriving at a solution that sufficiently aligns members of your group and garners enough support to implement it. Remember the issue of stakeholder management here, where you would like to ensure that all stakeholders are involved in the decision-making process, especially those ones that are critical, especially those ones that once you make that decision, the outcome is going to affect them. Now, once you have done that, when it comes to communicating the decision itself, you also have to ensure that everybody else is on the same page. This is because when people feel that the decision that has been made is not appropriate for them, people tend not to be aligned. And when people are not aligned, whenever you are working towards achieving the goal that you want to achieve, some other people will work differently, and that affects the execution and the output and outcomes of the work that you're trying to do. So it's always best to involve your stakeholders at each and every step of your decision-making process, and at the end, after you've made the decision. And remember, not everyone else within the key stakeholders can be agreeable to your decision that you have made. But then it's always important to achieve closure and to achieve alignment, so much so that even those people who do not agree with the decision would still work towards achieving the goal that you have set out to achieve with the decision which you have made, because they have understood the reasoning behind the decision which you have made. So they are most likely to follow suit and contribute positively than negatively. Lastly, there are so many strategies which you can still be able to use in the decision-making process. I will encourage you to also look into the Charity Entrepreneurship Handbook, probably the section that talks more about good decision making. There are tons and tons of information which you can use to ensure that you are making good decisions. In here, I've summarized some of the other considerations that the CE handbook talks about when making good decisions. Remember, I talked about biases, which are inherent, which you have to focus on to ensure that the decisions which you're making are not inherent biases that you have as a person. This is where constructive criticism comes in, and also engaging important stakeholders that might have different opinions from that you have, and making constructive assessments and arriving at a better decision, which deviates from a cognitive bias which is inherent within you. The second one being supporting evidence and their sources. Good decisions are based upon better supporting evidence, and this can be sought from experts, for example, from literature review, from research, and anecdote information that you can find. It is always vital when making decisions to ensure that you exhaust all the information opportunities that you can come across. The more information that you have, the better decision that you can make. And then lastly, it is always great to ensure that you are also able to assess your ability to make predictions and forecast. It is a known fact that sometimes we are always we can always be in a situation where we have to focus and make decisions based upon information, but then that decision will focus on something that will happen in the future. So we'll have to make a prediction about it, you know. So how can we best make a prediction that is right for the organization, or that is good for the organization? Consistently tracking how you have predicted things in the past and look at how they have turned out to be, whether good or bad, is always something which you can rely on as information, so much so that whenever you make that projection, it is still based upon previous experiences. Hence, it enables you to project better or to project right. Therefore, making predictions is important, or forecasting is important, through consistently recording your previous predictions or previous experiences that will enable you to predict in the right way and ensure that your project or the decision which you have made for the future is the right one. That was a lot of information. At this point in time, let's leave it there and allow for group discussions. Thank you.